I think now the time for Professor Dan Ripke. He will take care about next sessions, the next sessions, practitioners, sessions 4, it's best practice, the keynote speaker, Horizon 1. He will take care about these sessions. Professor Dan, go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join you all. It's interesting to get up at 5 a.m. and to be running late for a conference at 5 a.m. But we definitely appreciate the worldwide scope of this conference. So again, thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick this off with our first speaker, Peter Tyler, Professor of Urban and Regional Economics at the University of CMP, UK. Peter,
sorry, Dan, it's my colleague Giorgio Caselli who's giving the talk.
Hi, Dan. Okay. It's Giorgio here. Do you mind allowing me to share my screen and also my video? So I can't see myself on the video. Can you Dr. see me?
Hanadi, can you?
Yes. Go ahead and share. You have the control.
Fantastic. Yeah. Can you see me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Hanadi, first of all, and thank you very much, Dan. So let me just share my screen. Okay.
Yep.
So can you see my slides? Okay, good. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, albeit only virtually. So I am Dr. Giorgio Caselli, and I am a research fellow at the Center for Business Research at the University of Cambridge. Well, first of all, again, I'd like to thank also on behalf of Professor Peter Tyler, who is with me today, Hanadi, for again allowing us to be part of this very important event. And in our presentation today, so it is very much based on an ongoing research that Professor Tyler and I have been doing together with Dr. Andy Koch here at Cambridge, with the aim of establishing how a high technology cluster like the one we have in Cambridge, which is at the heart of the so-called Cambridge phenomenon, might look in a post-COVID, or shall I say, post-COVID lockdowns world. So the Cambridge phenomenon, which is a term that some of you may be familiar with already, is a term that was first adopted in a 1980 Financial Times article to describe what was basically the rapid growth of high technology companies in and around the city of Cambridge. And the phenomenon has recently celebrated its 60th anniversary. And indeed, Pete, Andy, and I, we produced a paper basically explaining the success factors behind the Cambridge phenomenon. And now Cambridge has become one of the leading high technology clusters in the world, and it is home to over 30 science campuses, including the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, which is Europe's largest healthcare and medical research center. So against this background, our research is seeking to establish how a high technology cluster like Cambridge might look in a post-COVID world, in terms of, for example, changes in shape or floor space requirements, and so on. And what I'll do in the research presentation today is I'll examine the performance of the Cambridge cluster before, during, and after COVID to try and answer two main questions, which you can see in this slide. So first, how well has the Cambridge High Technology Cluster fared during the pandemic? And second, what contribution does the cluster provide to the wider local economy when an external shock like COVID occurs. So here, just a bit of history of the cluster. So how has the Cambridge business base evolved over time? Well, early assessments of the size of the cluster indicated that there were about 300 high-tech businesses in Cambridge in 1985, made up mostly by quite small R&D-driven companies, often academic spin-outs. There was a limited number of large companies which tended to dominate employment during the 1980s. And then the situation changed quite significantly over the last 20 years, which saw a steady rise in the number of small and medium-sized businesses in the city. So there was a kind of shift, if you like, from a strong R&D base to R&D plus manufacturing. And Cambridge is now home to over 5,000 knowledge-intensive businesses based in the area. Plus, there are a number of what we call non-corporate KI, knowledge-intensive research organizations with the likes of the MRC Lab of Molecular Biology, the Wellcome Sanger Institute, the Babraham Institute, and Addenbrooke's Hospital. And alongside companies based in the area and non-corporate research organizations, there are also a number of international tech giants that have set up offices in Cambridge. Examples being Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, as well as Samsung. But the figure that is perhaps most revealing of the vibrancy of the cluster is the 20 plus, there is a bit of disagreement about exactly how many, unicorns that have been created in Cambridge since the start of the phenomenon. So if we then examine the size of the Cambridge cluster by decade, we can see that the process has not been linear, as some people think. So there has been a significant growth in employment from the 1980s to the early 2000s, followed by a slowdown during the mid-2000s, which was caused mainly by reductions in high-tech manufacturing. Growth then resumed in the late 2000s, with strong growth during the last decade, despite an external shock of the size of COVID. And that strong growth was driven by a fast expanding life science sector, as well as a fast expanding ICT sector. And indeed, the fast expansion of the life science and ICT sectors means that their contribution to total corporate employment in the Cambridge cluster has gone up quite significantly over the last decade, as we can see in this slide, with sectors such as biotechnology R&D or IT and computer services, as well as software development and publishing, playing an increasingly dominant role. Now, as part of our research, we also map the location of Cambridge-based companies operating in the two sectors that I've just mentioned, so life sciences and ICT, with the aim of understanding the geography of the cluster. So here we provide an example for the life science sector in the latest year that we have available, 2020-21. And this map shows strong employment concentrations around some of the main science campuses in the area. And then we also have an equivalent example for the ICT sector, which again shows noticeable concentrations around several business and science parks in the area, as well as near the city center. So then, what can we say about the evolution of the Cambridge cluster in a post-COVID world? Well, I should start by saying that there has been much discussion about how the growth of home working associated with the pandemic has changed the need for employees to work in their office spaces in traditional city centres and high-tech clusters like Cambridge. So there have been a number of questions in the aftermath of COVID. For example, has COVID changed the fundamentals, if you like? So the benefits of cluster proximity, agglomeration, or even the attraction of living in a vibrant city like Cambridge. What are the longer term effects on the workplace, commuting and home working? And also there are possible impacts on land and property markets. So for example, how much of the existing stock of both commercial and office space in cities may now be obsolescent in a more pandemic sensitive world? Or even how will the drive or the flight to quality of floor space provision affect the shape, form and location of buildings? So these are very much the kind of questions that we address in our ongoing research. And I should also say that there is research to be published in the Cambridge Journal of Regions, Economy and Society coming out this month, which reflects on the spatial impacts of the COVID pandemic on cities, as well as the scope for successful policy responses with the aim of both mitigating adverse consequences, but also encourage positive adaptive change. And especially there's going to be an article by Edward Glaser looking at reflections on the post-COVID city. And if we look at that research, one of the key takeaways that is relevant for our presentation today is that working from home, yes, is likely to be an entrenched feature, but at the same time, cities and their high-tech clusters are likely to remain places for interaction, diversity, and most importantly, the exchange of knowledge. So then what can we say more about the Cambridge cluster? What has happened to the cluster since the start of COVID? Now, we are well positioned to shed light on these issues as we've been conducting some work on assessing corporate performance within the Cambridge cluster in the aftermath of COVID. So we have produced 7 what we call updates so far, the latest being the October 2022 update. And these are obtained by sampling the CBR, so our Centre for Business Research, annual corporate database of all businesses based in the wider Cambridge region 3 times over the course of the year, so in February, June and October. And every time a large sample coverage is achieved, so on average over 40%. And if we then look at the latest update that we have available, it includes companies with a financial year end between December 2021 and April 2022. So the median year end is up to March 2022. So again, very up to date. And it includes a total of over 4,000 companies representing about 59% of corporate employment in the Cambridge area. And what we do in that research, and I'll summarize the key findings in a moment, we compare 3 years. So the first, which was largely unaffected by COVID. The second, which includes the bulk of the COVID impact. And the third, which is the one that I've just mentioned, which is looking at post-COVID lockdowns performance. So let's now look at some of the key findings about the performance of the cluster before, during, and after the COVID lockdowns. So this chart looks at the immediate impact of the pandemic on the Cambridge corporate economy by examining employment growth in KI, knowledge intensive, and non-KI sectors during 2019-20, on the horizontal axis and 2020-21 on the vertical axis by area. So GC is Greater Cambridge, the green area, and then Cambridge, the blue bubbles, identifies the Cambridge Local Authority District within the wider Greater Cambridge area, and then the orange one is South Cambridgeshire, which is the second local authority district within Greater Cambridge. So what this chart allows us to do is to compare corporate performance before and during COVID lockdowns. So what do we find? Well, we find that corporate employment growth slowed down from 5.5% in 2019-20 to 2.5% in 2020-21, reflecting indeed an impact of the 3 COVID lockdowns. However, this slowdown is modest considering the unprecedented disruption to business caused by the pandemic. If we look more closely at the results, we can see that the lower employment growth during COVID was due to a weaker performance of non-KI sectors compared with the pre-COVID period. And in fact, whilst employment growth in KI sectors remained high at 5.8%, non-KI sectors saw employment growth decline from 2.6% in 2019-20 to minus 2.1% in 2020-21, despite the famous, in a way, furlough scheme, which was introduced by the UK government to support businesses through the pandemic. Now, this chart then looks at the, if you like, recovery in employment growth in KI and non-KI sectors. So here we are comparing corporate performance during and after COVID lockdowns. Now, here we see that overall employment growth during the post-lockdowns period was positive and much stronger than during the lockdowns period. So employment growth increased from 2.5% in 2020-21 to 6.7% in 2021-22, possibly implying that businesses discovered how to live with COVID. The faster employment growth in the area during the most recent year was driven by, again, a strong performance of the knowledge-intensive sectors, which saw employment growth accelerate from 5.8% in 2020-21 to 10% in 2021-22. In turn, non-KI employment increased by 1.8% post-COVID lockdowns after declining during COVID. So this result indicates that the impact of the pandemic on the Cambridge non-KI economy has lasted longer than for the KI economy. This third chart here then examines the lasting effect of COVID, or whether there is any lasting effect on employment growth, by examining whether post-lockdowns growth rates in employment have resumed their pre-COVID levels. And here, the results suggest that corporate employment growth in the Cambridge area has started to recover from the worst effects of the pandemic, and that the recovery has been helped very much by the robust performance of KI sectors, whilst employment growth in non-KI sectors picked up in 2021-22, so after the COVID lockdowns, but still remained below its pre-pandemic levels. So this chart then qualifies the results that I've just presented by showing employment growth by sector before COVID, the blue bars, during COVID, the red bars, and after COVID, the green bars. So I'm conscious of time, so here I'll keep it simple. What we find is, first of all, a kind of difference between the findings for the KI sectors, so the 4 sectors on the left, and the 9 non-KI sectors on the right. So for example, key sectors in the area such as life science and healthcare, or even knowledge-intensive services, maintained strong growth in 2020-21, so the COVID period, despite the pandemic. Employment growth also remained high in the second important sector or KI sector in the area, which is the one I mentioned before, information technology and telecoms. And we find something different amongst non-KI sectors. And here I would just like to highlight one key finding, which is we find evidence of a recovery in what we call other services sector. These are sector definitions that we have developed, which is basically a sector including hospitality businesses that, as we know, were severely impacted by the pandemic. So there are some positive signs amongst non-KI sectors. And in fact, if we look at employment levels rather than employment growth, we can see that there has been continued increases in employment amongst the KI sectors and a pickup in employment in many non-KI sectors, although for all or virtually all of the non-KI sectors, employment in the post-lockdowns period remained, as I mentioned before, below its pre-pandemic levels. So to conclude, well, what we find if we look at the performance of the Cambridge cluster before, during, and after COVID is that employment growth of businesses based in the area, yes, slowed down during COVID, largely reflecting a weaker performance of non-KI sectors, but also that KI employment continued to grow at pace despite COVID in the area, testifying to the resilience of the Cambridge high-tech cluster. We find positive and much stronger overall employment growth in the post-COVID period, as I mentioned before, driven by large increases in KI employment. And if we then compare the performance before and after the lockdowns, that suggests that corporate employment has started to recover from COVID, and that was driven by strong growth of the KI sectors. So the kind of main result, if you like, is the important role of knowledge intelligence sectors, so of the Cambridge high technology cluster, in enhancing the ability of the wider local economy to withstand shocks like COVID. And I think these results are particularly relevant at the present time when several macro trends, including the ongoing war in Ukraine or sharp declines in living standards, as well as an impending global recession, call for greater understanding of how a city and high technology cluster like Cambridge, but not only like Cambridge, might look in the future. And obviously we will be delighted to discuss any of these issues with you in more detail. So I shall stop here and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Caselli. So next we have Dr. Zhang from the Asia Pacific University.
Okay, this way, Bin.
Good morning or good evening.
Here is midnight, 5 o'clock. Okay, thank you, Dan, and thank you for organizations to give me these opportunities to present my work in this important event. Can you allow me to share my documents?
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. That is it's moving. The picture is the PowerPoint is moving. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I just enjoyed the previous talks. Dr. Shelley or Professor Shelley's talks. It's very empirical, and I think it's a kind of follow-up, a little more theoretical, but actually the main concern is very similar, the modern technology and the chaos and the nonlinear dynamics. But I'm very theoretical, this one. I'm working on this field for many years. Today is on complex theory and with general economic theory. And then I'm talking a little about the economic growth and so on, this kind of stuff. And obviously, we are in the middle of chaos. That's the war, pandemic, domestic conflict, internet, whatever. And then we are obviously in position to ask, or situation to ask, to trust in what? Of course, we never trust anything seriously in human history or generally, but this time, because it's a pandemic, not only pandemic, and we are connected, then we're more aware of in trust of what and whose justice, that kind of things. And all these events lead to what? These basic questions. Actually, we humans are facing with the basic questions. That's, I think, that's a reason I think my research a little more meaningful or due to these kind of situations. And we know that the first thing is the invalidity of traditional theories. Since I'm talking about the theories today, then we know that we first noticed that the traditional theories in any field, special scientific or rational, is not so valid to explain like a nonlinear phenomena. That is especially due to the digital and the nonlinear science. We know the time is completely changed. We are in a different time, but we can talking. And the space does not matter so much in intellectual communication and transportations and so on. And all the cultural formations is facing with greater challenges, as we know. And all this one, this kind of phenomena is not new, but due to the modern development of science and typically, or especially the computers, then we can deal a little more appropriate than before. Then this is complexities. And today I'm talking about how complexity theory applied to this different field, especially about man and society and in economics. And this is the complexity theory. That is, we often say the complexity science, complex science, chaos theories, nonlinear dynamics, and synergetics, and so on, different names. And also in this kind of approach, you have keywords like you see the lock-in, path dependence, and catastrophes, and so on. Then this actually become to be a dominant approach in science, at least theoretical physics and so on from earlier, you see, 70s, and the economics the 80s. And this is I worked on this direction very earlier. This is one of the dominant figure in the field, theoretical physics. Professor Haken, he has a synergetics, he's German. There's a German approach, American approach, and the French approach, but more or less now they converge, more or less similar. But in the 70s, they're quite different. And Professor Haken is theoretical physics and highly mathematics. And I follow his ideas and apply to economics. And I have my first book 40 years ago around that's called synergetic economics. Then I apply this one to economics. And then later I have different, you see, extensions of this book and publish extensively in different places. Recently, I finished a book called The Chaos, Complexities, and the General Economic Theories, which today I present something related to that from that book. That is traditional and non-linear economics, or non-traditional science, or Newtonian science, and non-linear science. Then we know before, traditionally, like economics, if you study economics, you know there's only neutrality or decreasing returns. When you face with increasing returns, then you get trouble. You forgot it. and the stability, unique equilibrium, all these one are mainly characterized with Newtonian science. But in realities, all in nonlinear science is the opposite, not opposite, but not only this traditional world, but they covered like a scale, scope economics, typical like a cluster phenomena. Then this is the typical, let's say, topics and instabilities, like Cambridge, that's knowledge, not economics, whether it's stable or not, and whether have single equilibrium or not. This kind of, you see, I think that more or less you're aware what I mean, because it has been talked for many years. And like, for example, this is a typical models of catastrophes. Then you can see that from here, when economic system come to a special state, they have sudden change. A sudden change, that's called catastrophes. But in other places can be very smoothly change. This is my earlier models about China economic growth. It's about almost 30 years ago. 40 years, about 40 years ago. Then this is the openness. China suddenly opened, then you had your economic experience sudden economic growth. That whole structure changes. But take the 100 years to prepare and struggle in this area. Then suddenly overnight, historically we can claim it's overnight is growth. Because when I was brought up, the situation when China's people's wage salary, the salary is 1 month is about $5. Now it's around, if you're in large cities, 5,000. Some of them, the a little high middle class can, special IT 5,000. That's quite a difference. That is 100,000 times this increase. That is the sudden change. But how this kind of sudden change can occur, that you cannot explain in Newtonian approach. Similarly, like other is chaos. Like I have the small models also is many years ago about this is in the small cities, how the housing price can be very chaotic. And like right now, the exchange rates, that's chaotic. That's not to say stock market, why this kind of phenomenon occurred. Then this is basically complex theory explore this kind of phenomena. That is this is one of my earlier approach, but this is general, very scientifically very general reason. But what about economics? Then I apply to this economics. That's then my basic idea is that so far there's so many theories in economics, from Adam Smith to Keynes, and then you have modern mathematical economists, then like Samuelson, Tobin, and everything that they coexist in isolation from each other, as we know. But how to put this whole series to a single framework? There's a question when I was young. Of course, that's when you're young, you're stupid, you ask all kinds of questions. And if you feel you're smart, then you want to solve them. Then that's what I spent 30 years to solve this very simple question. When I was young, I asked, then the whole life just ask this question: how to put all economic theories to a general economic theory. This is the real general economic theory, not a Keynesian science. Keynesian is very partial, but he claimed to be a general economic theory. That's wrong acclamation. But it's not to say too much about negative about him. That's because each man has live in their own times. Then this is from Adams, Marthas, and Ricardo. These are the big guys in economics. But everyone are very partial. Like Karl Marx, his very limited vision about the world. And Adam Smith is right. It was right, like Newtonian physics was right once, but now it's not so right. At least it's a very special case of general economic theories. Same as Malthus. It's quite right if you're thinking of poor world. But if you look at the British or Japan is the opposite, is completely wrong about the realities. Then how to put everything, you see, put a very general theories and explain them in an integrated way. Then that is what I have tried to do. And this is Schumpeter. Schumpeter is basically about the technology, this conference. But Keynes is about the money, prices, and so on. They're different world. Actually, they're different world. One is long-term world. One is a very short daily world. But they fighting without any meanings, actually. That is like you're talking, you know, body, blood versus the bone. That's like Schumpeter is talking about bone, and Keynes talking about blood circulation. Then they are not same. It's just different questions, but we know they should be the same framework. Especially if you think in the long terms, then short running every day is important, because one day you happen that you die. That's a short run problem. The economics tend to separate them, but they should not be separated. Then, of course, that's a big guy, the summation. My work when my my first work that's called the synthetic economics, I just mentioned, is actually generalized his book Foundation of Economic Analysis. This is the godfather in modern economics. He has two books. One, he got a Nobel Prize with the linear science, very linear, but he beautifully summarized everything. But he don't have no idea about nonlinear world. Then I extending that world. Another, every day we are still using his textbook. Actually, almost all textbooks are imitating of his book, which sells million translate almost all languages. That is the most important book in introduction to economics. That is but in this book, he smartly explain everything in the very simple models, but without connecting different models. That is his way. And that because that is the time, because this is so many years ago, there's no advanced mathematics is available, and then he do what can be done. That's the reason he's a leading father of that generation. But when I came to economics, you see, so we have computer, have nonlinear science, then every tool is there, then I do it. Another is a little more tricky, because to ask a bigger question, you need a kind of stupidity or was I so be young and not without be associated with professional and high people or expert. I just read it. I found it should be done, but later on, I found it is a very dangerous way to do it. But I cannot return back anyway. Then I found that is how to generalize his these ideas. This book, that is actually that's my. Of course, after summation, you have many other figures. Actually, many giant figures like Solow, Tobin, Friedman, and Arlo. Friedman is money, Arlo is equilibrium, Tobin is money, then Solow is capital, Leontief is input-output system, and many others. But all of them actually are linear. All of them are linear. No one on non-linear world. Why? Because there's non-linear science when they have their golden time. When mathematics economics has the golden time, that's everything is Newtonian. Like if you look at Schumpeter, he have infinite expansion world. If you can look at Adam Smith, Ricardo Borges, then equilibrium. If you look at the Marx and Keynes and Marshall, then you have destructions. Everything is linear. But in real world, you know, there's cycles, there are chaos, there are bifurcations, the lock-ins and clusters, all these kind of phenomena, but they don't know it. Actually, they cannot know it. Even they know it, they cannot explain well about what happened. Then basically each one is good, each one is an expert. Then blind people are not so bad people, they are better massagers. You know what I mean? They are very good in their own field. It's just each one is very, very good at some part. But it's a time to connect it, even roughly, it's time. Then that's actually what I'm putting arrow. But everything should be in one system because we are living in the same world, as you know. The poor people, the poor world, the rich people, the rich world, but it follows same economic principles, biologies, and so on, the same principles. Is that one is then actually I start work. First book is called this initial about many years ago. Again, the first book is Knowledge and Values. And from here you can see these titles you already see is quite from Karl Marx. Karl Marx is capital. Therefore, capital is a part of this world, but the knowledge and the capital and the geographies. Here you can see geographies and the nonlinears already here. Everything is here already. This is the framework is very easy to, once you have done it, you can easily talking about it. Because I live in this world about 30 years, then it's very easy to talking how to build it. But at the beginning, it's a blind box. Then I fill in. That's from very simple world. Then you added all the economics to somewhere logically one mathematical equation, one set of mathematical equations. That is different from all. Of course, as you have different field like distributions, monetaries, regional, like international, and this is the regions. Like you say, just a few minutes, you have the regional economics and urban economics. That's the issue, and the monetaries and so on. Then this international trade. Then recently, then because pandemic, I'm old and have diabetes for many years. Not too old, but I have diabetes for many years. I think I may die. Then I hurry up to summarize what I have done. Called actually in my mind many years, but I think I will finish it about 10 years later. But this pandemic make me hurry up and finish. And that's you see the stories how this everything connected together. Why this nonlinear science is important? Because if you look at the world views, that one is basically Newtonian or faith religions. Another is an Asian. This yin yang. This is for British. They always think when I talking with the British, a friend, of course, they always your monkeys. We don't know you're talking about. That's kind of comments joking, but because these monkeys or Eastern Asians is a yin yang world because there's a British very clear logic and so on. But nowadays we have the real world, the chaos. Then actually I apply these ideas and later on after I finish my general theories and I explain to China's economic growth. Mathematically, I saw this or have my models many years ago, but for people to read it, to understand it, then you see from the title you can see the butterfly effect in China's economic growth, from socialist penury towards Marxist progressive capitalism. More or less, you can figure out what we're talking about.
Okay.
Actually, there's another book of what already finished. Americans that apply the same, you see, mathematics and the economic mentalities. I read a book on Americans, the greed and its self-destructions. And you know what I mean. So many negative things happen within Americans, and it's of course it's a still great country, but it is not so dominant and progressive as before. This is
Great.
then this is great changes. And actually, I have this 30 books in Amazon and 300 articles, everything by myself, because I don't cooperate with anyone. I don't believe that one. Sorry for that one, but that is only in the countryside. In countryside, you can see my background that actually I take in my home, as behind my home. That is
Great.
okay. That is about. Thank you for your attention. That is a little heavy talk, but too many contents.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shang. Thank you, and thank you for staying awake until after midnight for us.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. Thank you.
We enjoyed your presentation a great deal.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. And to wrap up our panel, we have a good friend, Dr. Ed Morrison. Ed, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey.
Yes, I am.
There's his smiley face.
How are you?
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. Dr. Morrison's he's the director of the Agile Strategy Lab, and I've had the pleasure of hearing Ed speak, gosh, dozens of times, but looking forward to your presentation this morning.
Thank you. And I'll just share my screen and start away here. Hold on just a second. Okay, I'm going to give you an overview of the work that we do in strategy and how strategic doing, the discipline we've developed is over the last 2 decades, has become and is becoming an open source operating system for ecosystems, collaboration, open innovation. And so I'm going to give you a dive into what strategic doing is, how it works, and how you can learn more about it. But you can think of it as a Linux, kind of a Linux for human collaboration. The basic idea here in the presentation is just 3 points. What is this? How did it develop? And why does it work? So here's the problem that I encountered in my work. Initially as a consultant, I started out as an offshoot of as a corporate strategy consultant, as an offshoot of the Boston Consulting Group, worked on globalization problems in the early 1980s, and then went off and did my own consulting with communities focused on, again, globalization, the emergence of China, as we've just heard, the emergence of China in the 80s and in the 90s, created great disruptions in places like the US. So I focused on that. And then in the early 1990s, I started working on a new approach to strategy that was much more focused on the real problems that we had. And to summarize that, it's how do we innovate? How do we collaborate? How do we create new value when nobody can tell anybody else what to do? This is the problem that we have in ecosystems. Ecosystems are not directed by anyone. They're not hierarchically organized. And so here on my journey through the last 30 years are some of the people that I met and some of the problems that they dumped on my desk to try to address. The first one is in Charleston, South Carolina, is Ernest Andrade. And he asked, how do we build a digital cluster in Charleston, South Carolina, but we don't have a research university. We don't have a major research university. So how do we do this? How do we create a cluster of companies without that major research base? Here we had actually a research base. There was a research base and a company base in along the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan. This is one of the Great Lakes in the United States, and this is Milwaukee. And a professor there said, how do we build a freshwater technology cluster in Milwaukee? And this was, again, about 2007 or 8. He asked this question. He saw ahead that we were going to be facing major problems with water. And so he wanted to figure out how to build a cluster in water. This is my colleague at the Agile Strategy Lab here in the University of North Alabama. She was working with a company that was allied with Stanford University. Stanford had gotten a major grant from the National Science Foundation here in the United States, trying to transform 50 universities in engineering education. How do we put entrepreneurship and innovation into an undergraduate engineering across 50 universities? And then this is Elizabeth Taylor. She's an engineer, but she was in charge of life sciences in NASA, big unit of life scientists in NASA. And of course, what they were focused on is going to Mars, which is the main mission right now of NASA. But the question that they asked, or Elizabeth asked me, is how could we build collaborations across life scientists among the life scientists in NASA? And these go from all the way from molecular biologists all the way up to human physiologists. So the question quickly that you start to run into when you do this kind of work is, how do we develop trust? How do we develop the trust to help power this innovation, to power this collaboration? And so this, let's dig into that question in a bit with a bit more detail here. And what we're talking about here is all the way over on the right-hand side of the slide, which is we need to find a way to innovate together. But in order to do that, we are going to have to build trust. And we start out typically all the way over on the left-hand side of this slide. We start out with awareness of a potential partner. We start to explore that partner. We may cooperate. We may coordinate our schedule. We may meet for a meeting. We may cooperate. We may even agree to share resources. We may even have a teamwork situation where we're coming together to work on an outcome that's already been determined. But what we're really trying to get to when we talk about ecosystems, we're trying to create innovating networks. We're trying to create collaboration. Collaboration is a process of coming together, and it's a process of recombinant innovation where we take assets from partners, multiple partners, and we put them together and create something entirely new. That requires a high level of trust, which implies that this takes time. This takes time. In other words, it's a process that we have to manage. So the question is, how do we manage this process? What is this process? And what we've learned is that the process of building trust is a process that emerges out of a pattern of matching our words with our deeds, matching what we say with what we do. And so strategic doing is all designed around this idea that we are going to continuously make commitments and do things together. And as we do that, we will build patterns of trust, which in turn power our innovation capability, power our ability to go forward. So after some 20 years working on this, we wrote a book, Strategic Doing. I encourage you to read it. It tells you about the 10 skills that you need to manage these conversations. But we're gonna quickly go into this and dig a little bit deeper. But the truth of the matter is that there is a protocol. There is a discipline you can follow, and you can teach people to increase both the volume and the velocity of your collaborations. In other words, the vibrancy of your ecosystem. It's not as serendipitous. We can actually develop a protocol or an operating system that people can understand and practice and get and master through practice, and they can increase the volume and velocity of their collaborations. In other words, they can increase the potency of their ecosystem. So what is strategic doing? Well, it is a discipline. It's a set of skills, an interconnected set of skills, just like playing the piano is a discipline. Learning a language is a discipline. Playing a violin is a discipline. These are a set of interrelated skills that you practice to master. And it's designed for teams and ecosystems. It's really designed for teams and ecosystems. And what it enables you to do is form complex collaborations quickly. These are collaborations that are very sophisticated, but you form them in a matter of hours. You form them very quickly. And then you move toward measurable outcomes. In other words, strategic doing generates data, tells us where we're going, how we're doing, and enables you to make adjustments to figure out whether you're on track or not. And so you can make adjustments much like a kayaker or a canoeist would make adjustments in the water. You can make adjustments quickly because you have the data to do it. And it's open source. In other words, we designed it so that there's no underlying IP that you license. You just learn it. You learn the discipline. You take some training courses if you want. You read the book, you take some training, and you learn the discipline and you practice the discipline, just like you would practice learning the piano or learning the violin. You practice this, and it's designed and it helps collaboration, open innovation, and ecosystems. That's what it does. So where does it focus? Now, this is the surprising aspect of this, perhaps, is that it focuses on our conversations. Now, our language emerged 150, 200,000 years ago, but our language distinguishes us as a species from every other species. We can reflect with our language, we can communicate with our language, and we can collaborate with our language, but we're not very good at it. And so when we started talking about the knowledge economy in the 1990s, a very smart editor of the Harvard Business Review came up and said, you know, the key element to a knowledge economy is managing our conversations. It's because through our conversations, we generate knowledge and we distribute knowledge. We reveal the knowledge that we have in our heads, the implicit knowledge we have in our heads, and we share our knowledge. And we do that through our conversations. And what strategic doing has illustrated is that collaborations, our capacity to innovate, emerges out of conversations with a very predictable structure to it. And if you understand the structure, you can speed up the collaborations that you're doing. And so this is the important insight. So we spent about, we'll talk about that in a minute, but we spent a lot of years trying to figure out how do we teach this discipline? So this is basically the structure of the discipline. The discipline answers the two key questions of strategy. Any collaboration that you have, any partnership, any collaboration you have, any organization, any ecosystem really is got to answer two questions if it's going to have a strategy. The first question is, where are we going? What's the outcome we're heading toward? What's the outcome we're heading toward? And then the second is, what's the path? What's the path we're going to take that we need to take? So by answering these two questions, we have a strategy by definition. Now, that rigorous definition of strategy, if you pull out most strategic plans, they fail according to those two criteria. We've often had people come to us and say, hey, we've got this strategy document. And I say, well, what's the problem? And they said, we don't know what to do. So the point is, they have a strategy document, but they don't have a strategy because they don't know what to do. So you have to answer these two questions. Where are you going? What's your next step? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? So in order to do that in a conversation, we structure the conversation around four questions. What could we do? What should we do? What will we do? And what's our 30-30? I'll leave that last question for a minute and explain it. But the first two questions give us an outcome, and the second two questions give us a path. So if we have a conversation, by definition, if we have a conversation that focuses and answers these four questions, we will come out with a strategy. So that's what strategic doing enables you to do. Now, the what's our 30-30 is a really critical question. And it was designed around the first time I did this in 1993. We had 30-30 meetings where we come back together every 30 days and ask ourselves, what did we learn the last 30 days? What are we going to do the next 30 days? So it creates the adaptive learning loop to your strategy. What's our 30-30? In order to manage this, in order to be really good at it, there are 10 skills, 10 rules, 10 skills that you can master, and you master them through practice. So we've identified these 10 skills. You're not going to be equally good at all 10 skills, but you can practice all 10 skills. Some of them are going to be easy. Some of them, after 30 years, I still feel like I'm writing with my opposite hand. I can do them, but I have to pay attention. Others, I can do it without paying much attention. The second point I want to make, though, is that ecosystem strategies, what we've been talking about, what you've been talking about in this conference, ecosystems, they form on platforms. Strictly speaking, you don't create a strategy or manage an ecosystem. It's a complex adaptive system. You can't really manage it. But what you can do is manage the activities on the platforms on which the ecosystem forms. That's what you're focused on. You're managing the platform on which these ecosystems emerge. So you keep focused on the platform. The platform exists outside the existing organizational structures. You're not trying to reorganize anything. You're creating a platform on which willing participants come, and you design the activities on that platform. And out of those activities, collaborations and ecosystems form. So that's the theory of change. The design of the conversation, that the 4 questions are divergent at first and then convergent. And so part of the mastery of learning how to design and guide these conversations is understanding, how do I guide the conversation so that it's divergent, excuse me, and then how do I pivot this conversation quickly so it becomes convergent and then recursive, then we do it again. So this is the underlying structure. And when you do this, you can create platforms, and this is where we are now. I'm taking you onto the frontier of our work in the Agile Strategy Lab. We're focused on building what we call Zebra, which is a platform that enables multiple ecosystems to form. So it's not just one ecosystem, it's multiple ecosystems, because an economy is networks embedded in other networks, or ecosystems embedded in even other ecosystems. So it's not just one ecosystem. You're trying to create a platform, and you're managing all of those ecosystems off the platform with data flows back to the platform. That's the possibility. So how did all this develop? Well, it developed a long time. In 1993, I was a corporate strategy consultant. As I said, I was frustrated with strategic planning, traditional strategic planning that we had learned and applied in General Electric and Ford and Volvo, which were the 3 major clients that I worked with. And it just didn't work. It didn't work very well. And so in 1993, in Singapore, a client company, early internet company, chief technology officer came to me and said, well, let's go to lunch. And so I said, yeah. And he asked me what I did, and I told him, and I said, I'm really frustrated by this. It's not working out very well. And he told me about 2 things. He said, the internet is coming. The commercial internet is coming. And about a year later, Netscape released its commercial browser. And then the second thing he said is it's open source software is a way for you to think about how to do complex work in open networks. So he said, recognize the internet's coming. It's our first interactive mass medium. It's going to change everything. And then secondarily, there's a model out there called open source software where people come together, do complex work in open networks, but they follow some fairly simple rules in order to do this complex work. If you can apply that kind of construct to strategy, you might have something. So I started to do that. I spent about 10 years doing that. And by 2005, I had a model in my head. I had replicated it several times. I knew it was stable, but I didn't know how to validate it. I wanted to validate it, make sure that it was rigorously validated. And then secondarily, I wanted to learn how to teach it. So I went to Purdue University. I spent from 2005 to 2019 at Purdue. But by 2016 or so, we were pretty clear that we could validate this model. We used it in a variety of different contexts and that we could teach it. And so in 2019, we wrote the book. I retired from Purdue. University of North Alabama invited me to come there. And so we started putting strategic doing online. So we did work online. And then I actually completed a PhD in economics that explains why strategic doing works. So we'll go into that in a little bit. So why does this work? Well, as I said, if you want to know, there's a dissertation out there, and you can download the dissertation and learn why it works. But let me give you a brief overview. The reason why this works is because it's based on practice. It's a practitioner's view. That's what I am. But the scholars can explain why it works from a scholarly viewpoint, from a scholarly research viewpoint. And the way in which we demonstrated why it works is to go down each one of the 10 rules and understand what are the research streams that demonstrate that this actually works, that this rule actually works. So we decomposed the whole thing, looked at every research stream, at every rule, understood that there are 3 or 4 research streams under each one of these rules, and then outlined why it is that each one of these rules works. So that's essentially what the dissertation does. It goes down and it looks at each one of those rules. And if you want to go through that, that's great. It's a multidisciplinary approach. We have behavioral economics in it. We have, of course, strategic management. We have cognitive psychology as part of it. So there's a variety of different disciplines that come in to explain why this works. So how do we know it works? Well, if I go back to my people who approached me about these complex problems, let me go back to that. In 2008, we had a workshop, and then 3 months later, we started building this cluster out, and we built it around these 4 areas of focus. And if you go now to the Water Council in Milwaukee, it's a global water hub. It's a global water hub. If you look at Charleston Digital Corridor, it is now one of the hottest digital areas in the country. It punches way above its weight, even though it doesn't have a research university. And why is that? Well, we built an ecosystem around that. If you look at the challenges that we faced with Lockheed, where they said, can we deploy condition-based maintenance across the Aegis destroyer fleet? We need to build an ecosystem that enables us to do this. And so we built an ecosystem with 20 outside companies helping Lockheed design this technology roadmap. And we did it with 4 workshops in 6 months. And we use strategic doing as the operating system. And now the most important aspect of that is the small companies involved. Because if you've had any experience building ecosystems, small companies are very wary of large companies, of sharing information with large companies. They don't like to do it. But if you have an ecosystem operating system, if you have an operating system, if you have a set of rules and a protocol that you're following, then the small companies feel safe enough to be able to participate. And you've got to have a process that's simple, easy, straightforward, and powerful. With our 50 collaborations, 50 universities, we generated over 500 collaborations, and you can see one of these university representatives making his pitch on what his strategy is, where he's going, where his team's going, and how he's going to get there. And he's got 2 minutes to give us that pitch. And then about a year and a half ago, Julio Jose Prado, who I had met at Purdue, he's a business professor, PhD in clusters, dissertation in clusters, a cluster expert, and he was appointed to be the Minister of Production and Trade in Ecuador. And he pinged me on LinkedIn and said, how do we deploy strategic doing across Ecuador? I want to use strategic doing across Ecuador. And so now we have embedded strategic doing in 20 different clusters. They don't all work. Some of them do, some of them don't. That's the nature of the game. But it's the operating system that we're using in Ecuador to accelerate collaboration across multiple sectors. So we do this in Spanish. We do this in Dutch. We teach it in Dutch. We teach it in Chinese. And we now have recognized scholars like Amy Edmondson, who's been very gracious to give us their stamp of approval on this kind of work. And of course, this is the gentleman, former President Martin Jischke at Purdue, who gave me the headroom. He gave me a job for over 10 years, closer to 15 years to develop this. So I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Martin Jischke. So, and then finally, one of my highlights of my life was meeting Yo-Yo Ma. Yo-Yo came to a strategic doing workshop. He got excited about it. He read the book, and then he wrote the preface to our book. So it's a discipline that you can learn quickly. And what are some next steps for you? Well, you can listen to a podcast about this. I'm now on the conference board. I'm a senior research fellow with the conference board. So the conference board's done a podcast on this. You can read the book, or you can just go to the website. There's a lot of material on the website and our institute website that you can look at. So, and then please, if you choose to connect with me in LinkedIn. Let me stop share. And Dan, I don't know if that's what you need, but I'm really pleased to participate in this conference. I've done it a couple of years, and it's really a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers on our panel, Dr. Castelli, Dr. Zhang, and Dr. Morrison. So thank you all for your participation. Dr. Hanadi, I don't know if we have any time for questions. I'm willing to give up some of my time because I'm in the next session presenting. I can take 10 minutes off.
Hi. Thank you so much, Professor Dan. How are you, Professor Edward? I know you are on time. How are you? Hi, Professor Zhang and Giorgio. How are you?